The absent-minded maestro was running down a New York street, late for a rehearsal. And a stranger tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Excuse me, can you tell me how to get to Carnegie Hall?" He said, "Practice." And in the classic novel, Catch-22, spoiler alert, the World War II bomber pilot practiced getting shot down on every mission so that when the opportune time came, he could get shot down for real and desert safely to Sweden. Now, we might not think of it as getting shot down, but Toastmasters lets us practice our leadership and speaking skills in a safe, supportive environment. The problem is, it can be so much fun at our Toastmasters meeting that I think sometimes we forget why we come here in the first place. Yeah, our meetings are fun. We learn things. We learn about investments. We see some great pictures. We hear some good stories. We laugh a lot. But that's not why we come here. We come here because of real life. Let's go through the roles that we go through at our meeting and compare that to why we do those roles at a meeting here so that we can take what we learned out into our real life and practice. We're going to go through all of the roles very quickly. I'm going to summarize. I have 3 points under each one, but we may only cover 1 or 2 just for time reasons here. Let's start with Sergeant at Arms. First of all, we appreciate Eric and our Sergeants at Arms that come here and set up the meeting every day. How much easier it is to walk in with everything set up, with coffee. We don't have to worry about it. When we set up our own meetings at work, we often have to be our own Sergeant at Arms. If there's equipment that needs to be turned on, we need to be there to do that. We need to start that meeting on time, like Eric pounds the gavel. And we all appreciate it when a meeting starts on time and finishes on time. The Sergeant at Arms, our role as a meeting organizer often is that Sergeant at Arms to start it up. If there's a possibility that we would bring food or refreshments, we want to arrange that. That can help out, especially if you're trying to bribe somebody and do a good decision. Again, we just want to get all set up on time. The other thing about Sergeant at Arms is we can also, even if we're not the organizer, we can help somebody that is the organizer. We can act as the Sergeant at Arms to help them out. Toastmaster, of course, facilitates a meeting. We're often a Toastmaster when we organize a meeting at work and we invite people to come. We set the agenda. That's an important thing, is to actually provide that agenda to people so they know what we're talking about. Actually shows that we might actually get something done at this meeting. We often, as Toastmasters here, confirm with our speakers in our different roles. Are you going to be there? Do you have a prepared topic? What are you going to talk about? How long is it going to be? We do those things ahead of time, but how many of us work that hard when we're organizing a meeting in real life? Do we confirm with the people that we're going to ask to respond to certain topics or lead a discussion or give a presentation? Do we find out how long it's going to take so that we can set the agenda appropriately? And do we keep that meeting running according to our agenda so that we can end on time and still get everything done? If we kind of take that same mindset of a Toastmaster into a meeting organizer role, I think it'll help our meetings run more effectively at work. Now, I'm going to pause here and go off script a little bit from the classic outline because I despise most meetings. If it's just meetings to give updates, I have no use for them. If there's meetings where we actually get something done, that's fine. On a recent project where I worked for about 2 years, I was acting as a developer. I wrote code. I'm going to show you a little cartoon that says why you should not interrupt a developer. One thing I hate is when I'm working on coding something is to get a short meeting in the middle of the day. I'll often get a project manager who will call up in the middle of the day and just say, "Hey, can we just take a 15-minute update meeting?" Here's what happens when that happens to me as a developer. I'm focused in on my code. Doesn't matter what it's saying there. I have a little issue. Okay, I'm thinking. And then it's getting a little more. I'm okay, in logic, I'm thinking this. And as I work through, I'm getting way down into 3 or 4 levels of a decision tree. And I've got data I'm moving around in my head and thinking, how's this going to look if I do this? And it gets really complicated because now I'm about 4 or 5 levels down into this and I'm really in the zone and man, I'm getting things done. And then a project manager either calls up with a little update or I've got to stop working because there's a 15-minute update meeting in the middle of the morning or the middle of the afternoon. Poof! Everything just goes away. And I have to come back up. And it's usually something like, oh, excuse me. Yeah, in this cartoon, it's just somebody popping in and saying, hey, I sent you something. Or, good morning, how you doing? And all that thinking goes away. So now I have to start all over again. So when I have a short little meeting in the middle of the day, even if it's a 15-minute scheduled meeting, it uses up about 45 minutes of my day, because I spend 15 minutes getting into the zone again after that in the meeting, and then 15 minutes getting back into it afterwards. That's my rant for the day. So I'm just suggesting that meetings be scheduled either at the beginning of the day or at the end of one part of the day, so that you're not, especially if you're working with developers and bringing them in, so you're not interrupting their day. Humor Master, here, it's fun to start the meeting with a laugh. If we're organizing a meeting, we can welcome everybody. We can tell a little bit of small talk, a little bit of maybe a joke or a funny story, just to get things going, to set the tone for relaxation. It can also diffuse a tense situation if it's used appropriately. Obviously, there are situations where we don't introduce humor, but there are times when it can lighten up the mood and make the meeting go a little bit better. And one thing I like too is practicing Humor Master at Toastmasters allows us to know how to react when something isn't funny in real life. And you can handle it much better if you've practiced it here. Grammarian, of course, gives us new words that we can use in our real writing, and real speaking. We should eschew obfuscation. Don't use fancy words. But it does allow us to recognize words that we might not use on a regular basis. And especially if we're writing, we might be able to incorporate some of the words that we learn here in writing, especially emails. As a speaker here, we practice and we prepare. When we're getting ready for a meeting in real life, do we spend as much time preparing as we do for a speech here? If we're giving a presentation, depending on what our audience might be, maybe we do. But even if we're just going to be called on to speak in a meeting, do we prepare our thoughts ahead of time, so that we can convey a clear message, and that we actually can either educate or inform our audience and hold their attention so that they can actually learn something and hear what we're saying. Table topics, of course, give us a chance to practice and think on our feet. An example I often use when I'm describing benefits of table topics is responding during a job interview of some sort, so that you can give that response very quickly, very succinctly. But in a meeting, very often we're called to respond to what somebody else has said. We're put on the spot, somebody might ask us a question. That's a good chance for us to practice our table topic techniques. Think in our mind like it's a question at Toastmasters that we get for table topics. How am I going to convey this in a minute or less? A great opportunity to practice table topic speaking is in the classic 15-minute stand-up meeting, which never lasts for 15 minutes. It always goes for half an hour or 45 minutes because people are unable to craft a message and say it in a minute. In a stand-up meeting, you're just supposed to say what I'm working on, what I did yesterday, what I've got done, what I'm doing tomorrow, any obstacles I've got. But we should be able to say that succinctly and without going for 15 minutes on the difficulties I had with this code or whatever it was. Great opportunity to practice that, and even in conversation, just to say, what am I going to say, and how do I say it fairly quickly? And as the evaluator here, we give give feedback. As speakers here, we receive feedback. We don't often think of that in a real-life meeting, because we're not going to stand up in our real-life meeting and say, Joe, when you presented this, you could have done this better and you could have done this. However, we do give feedback on what Joe said because we're responding to the message. We may agree or disagree. We may propose something differently, but I think that gives us an opportunity to give constructive criticism maybe to the idea or advance that. And one thing is, we can actually ask for feedback from our people. As they're in the meeting, how did that meeting go? How do you think it went? I did a presentation yesterday and I had a friend sitting out there. I said, just take some notes. Watch the reactions of the audience, watch what I did, see what's effective, what's not. I'm gonna do this meeting again. And he took a bunch of notes, he's typed it up and given it back to me here, just so that he can give feedback. And I'll ask if we can find a trusted mentor in our organization to give us feedback on how we run meetings and how we come across to people. That's valuable. Seek that out. And if you also can develop that mentorship with somebody else and give them feedback, that's awesome. And of course, a timer role here I'm getting a yellow light now, so I know that I'm getting very close to my time. Now I got a red light. I'm going to accelerate things a little bit. Mike would just say, just sit down, and we're going to go there. In a real meeting, we're often our own timer because we're running the meeting. We kind of keep it onto the agenda, and we want it to end on time. In some cases, we might actually have somebody be a timer. I had a project where we had to write definitions for 1,000 data elements with a committee. You can imagine what that would take. So we actually appointed somebody to give us a maximum of 3 minutes per definition. If we weren't done, he wrote it down. We came back to it later, but we were able to progress then, so we didn't spend 20 minutes on one and use up all of our time. Again, ask who's going to present, what their time needs are, so that you can actually plan your agenda accordingly and you make sure you get it done and they get to say what they wanted to say. Again, in an odd-counter role, we don't usually do that in a meeting. We're not going to evaluate somebody's filler words during a work meeting. However, we can monitor our own speech, pay attention to what we're saying so that we refrain from annoying people with mannerisms. One thing that isn't on our agenda every week in our Toastmasters meeting is the non-assigned member. Because as members of Chamber Toastmasters, we should show our respect with our attendance and attention. By just being here without a role, we add critical mass to the audience, we give verbal or nonverbal feedback to that speaker so they just get used to speaking to a larger crowd. So one of the best things that we can do is just be here and honor the preparation of those speakers of our fellow Toastmasters. Michael Jordan said, practice like you've never won, play like you've never lost. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you.